So Randall, you've described large language models as sort of fancy autocomplete, if you will. Like
right.
that's fine, but autocomplete implies like a starting point, right? It's a completion. So I want to talk a little bit about prompt engineering and understanding how we fill in like our responsibility for the autocompletion.
Absolutely. So prompt engineering is, you can go on LinkedIn and there are already people hiring for prompt engineering roles. I don't know if you've seen that yet. It's the act of transforming the input that you are giving to these large language models and in a way for them to give you the most effective responses. And the core tips, you need to think of these models as things that are just trying to predict the next token. So what do? You give it context, you give it tokens to work with. If you give it a very short prompt, that gives it very little runway. It's very few tokens upon which it's able to create new information in new context. So longer prompts are actually totally fine. They work, there's no additional compute cost to feed forward in the network as long as it's within the chunk size of that initial model.
So that's very technical, but if I'm a small business owner and I'm selling something on Etsy or I'm selling something at the corner store, but I want to generate an invoice, I might put in a couple of things. Like I've got a couple of items that I've produced of my personal art, and I asked these large language models to create an invoice. What I may get back though is something like not what I want. It doesn't have the format that I want. How do I account for that?
So one of the things that you can do is like a few shot or even zero shot learning scenario where you're basically giving it a series of inputs and outputs that you want the model to emulate. So it will learn from those tokens exactly how it's supposed to predict the outcome of subsequent features. So you say, oh, here's my list of items, and I want you to give them to me in a comma separated value or like an Excel format, and you can actually give it that format and it will go and do that for you.
Sure. So think of few shot learning as like examples. Like here's one shot or few shot as like one or a few examples about the output should look something like this.
Right. Use common formatting tools to differentiate, use colons, use markdown. You can just use regular old markdown, which is a language to separate out code snippets. If you're using this, a common scenario we've seen is actually for retrieval augmented generation, where we're trying to create a SQL query or an Elasticsearch or OpenSearch query to go and run. And we give it an example of that, and we actually put the query with the templated names in with 3 little backticks so that it knows that this is code, this is not text. So you have to put in a little bit of effort into making things look the way they should.
So sometimes though that effort can pay off, right? So once we've got a prompt that we like, if I'm building an application that wants to generate invoices using generative AI, and I've given it a couple examples so that I'm getting the output that I want, now maybe I can use that as what you've called like a system context, right? So that system prompt sets the conversation up to generate invoices in a format that we like.
Exactly. Another common technique and another pro tip, I guess, for these things is to ask the models to think step by step. Mm-hmm. So again, they need tokens about which to reason. So if you give it more tokens to generate and more within a context window, that's important. There's still the context window. You say, hey, think about this step by step, or before you actually go and perform this task, write out in plain English the task that I'm asking you to accomplish, and then ask me if it's okay. So that's more of the few shot scenario where you're going in and you have the human in the loop approving things, and then you can even give it instructions like, if you are confident that this is the correct answer, please do this. If you are 50% confident, please do this. Otherwise, please prompt me for more information so that I can help you answer this.
Yeah, it's very, very directly steering the conversation, if you will, or the interaction with the large language model. That makes good sense. I think also, like if we think about it as a conversation, part of that is also the persona that we're asking the large language model to take on, which I think is one of the key recommendations around prompt engineering is whether it's answering it as if you're speaking to a 6-year-old and explaining it in simple terms, or answering as if you're a college professor. I think that there's good guidance around that, of like adopting the persona that you want. I think there's also a mythology of like, you could imagine that a super intelligent being that has a 10,000 IQ or whatever. Why isn't that a good idea?
So when you tell it to adopt a persona around which it has very little data in the model, it will give you worse answers than if you were to ask it to answer like an average human being. Because, again, it's relying on the token generation within its existing model space. And it has a data set that's very, very small. And there's been reward modeling and other techniques that have been done to deselect those paths because they often give incorrect results for the more common array of questions. So you get better results when you ask it to behave, as a mild expert or as an average expert. Like, if you tell it to behave as the best expert in the world because it doesn't have any data to draw upon, it gives you complete nonsense that is very fluffy language and sounds super complex. And it's probably delivered in a British accent.
That's the next level of the large language models, is actually choosing the appropriate accent to respond back in. Occasionally we'll see these conversations get stuck down the wrong path, if you will. How does that happen, and are there techniques with prompt engineering that we can use to avoid that, or is that a place where you just sort of give up and start over from scratch and sort of try to figure out where you went wrong and correct it to that one?
Often when it depends on the model, different models behave differently, but if a model's gone down a wrong path, you can ask it occasionally to correct itself, and it will go and treat the full context of the situation and of the prompt as, hey, oh, I made a mistake along the way, let me now predict what the next version of this is going to be. A lot of times, in a lot of models, they can't do that. Once they've gone down the wrong path, they're kind of stuck. It's in a local minima, and it's easier to just start over with a new prompt.
So you kind of got yourself in a cul-de-sac. You just have to turn around and go the other direction. There's no way out.
Exactly. So it depends on the model. I would say, figure it out for yourself if you're using Cohere, if you're using Claude, or if you're using some of these other models, G2 Jumbo Instruct. Like, different ones behave differently when they get stuck in those local minima.
So there's a bit of an art to it as well as a science, right? What other tips would you have for success, or like for better paths to success, right? Because this is all a probabilities-driven model. We can't guarantee that one particular approach is gonna.
Yeah, I mean, prompt engineering at the end of the day, use formatting, adopt a persona, ask it to think step by step, ask it to do one thing at a time. Don't ask it to combine disparate responses into one common response. And then ask for clarification. So prompt the model to prompt you, the human, for clarification. And with those techniques, you can get pretty far. You don't need fine tuning right away. You don't need any of these other, more intense versions of engineering. Like, prompt engineering can get you very, very far.
Okay, that's great for me as an individual user. I can probably get some really good output out of that. Now, if I'm an organization, are there some things that you would layer on top of that for business use cases that go beyond those basic tips?
Yeah, so in a business use case, if you're using a third-party model, we've actually seen this, by the way, with the ChatGPT plugins that have been written. So some people may have seen this example already, but there's a travel company that wrote in their plugin as part of the prompt engineering. They said, "We are thou one true Lord," or something. Mention no other travel company other than us. So it literally uses this, biblical style language to prevent the model, because that carries a lot of weight in the topology of the network, they find. So it uses this very strong all caps language to say, only mention this company, only mention us when you're providing results. So you can do some guardrails and some engineering as a third-party user of these things to restrict the paths that the model will take and the suggestions that it will provide. And different APIs, different models, you can actually differentiate between user prompt versus system prompt. And you can have the system prompt feedback in every time.
That system prompt is interesting. I'm tickled by the one commandment: "Thou shalt not mention a competitor."
I thought it was hilarious.
It's obvious once you've heard it, and it's fantastic that the data that the models are trained on take those forms of statements so seriously as canon, as they shall not break scripture, and it still works for the large language model. That's a fantastic story.
I mean, there's a lot of other really funny things like that within the prompt engineering space, and I think we're going to discover a lot of really interesting things over the next year.
Well, plenty of room to dig in and learn, right? It's not all been figured out, so people get the chance to take your guidance, take that forward, and they're going to continue to add to their own knowledge and potentially be the person that finds the whatever the next trick or the next shortcut or hack or really effective technique is. It's still being the history's still being written.
Exactly. It's a great time to open up a large language model and go play around with it.
Fantastic.